What happens when one of the world's most powerful leaders reaches his breaking point? Vladimir Putin has issued a chilling ultimatum with fiery words: they will experience far greater destruction. His statement has shocked the world. What has driven him to this point, and how will Ukraine respond to this unprecedented warning? Early Saturday morning, chaos erupted in Kazan as a drone attack struck residential buildings in the city, far from the active conflict zones near Ukraine. While there were no casualties, the psychological impact was immediate. For many Russians, this was not just a military incident but a terrifying signal that even cities deep within the country are no longer safe. The Kremlin swiftly accused Kiev of orchestrating the attack, marking a significant escalation in the conflict. Although Ukraine has not claimed responsibility, the strike is seen as a bold move targeting Russia's heartland rather than its military infrastructure. During a formal ceremony in Moscow, Putin's anger was palpable. His warning was both fiery and ominous: anyone attempting to destroy anything in our country, no matter how small, will experience far greater destruction in their own. He suggested that the Kazan attack represented a line that, if crossed, would have grave consequences. This attack has not only provoked a furious response but also brought renewed attention to Putin's recent threats. For weeks, he has hinted at deploying Russia's most advanced weapon, the Oreshnik missile, a system first used in November that has already demonstrated its devastating capabilities. The missile can target infrastructure with unprecedented precision. During the same ceremony, Putin emphasized its role in Russia's retaliatory strategy, declaring, "Those who threaten our sovereignty will face consequences they cannot imagine." The attack on Kazan appears to be a turning point. Putin has previously alluded to targeting symbolic and critical infrastructure in Kiev, including the city center. With this recent provocation, those warnings now take on a far darker and more immediate tone. His rhetoric reflects growing frustration with Ukraine's resilience and its ability to carry out such daring strikes. The Kremlin's message is clear: Russia is no longer willing to hold back in its efforts to secure its borders and retaliate against its enemies. Ukraine has long used retaliatory strikes to counter Russia's aggression, targeting oil depots, industrial facilities, and infrastructure within Russia. Kiev's goal is to disrupt Moscow's war machinery and send a clear message that Ukraine will not back down. However, the attack on Kazan represents a new chapter. Rarely have Ukrainian or other actors targeted residential buildings so far from the conflict zones. For Putin, this attack crosses a line. In his address, he declared, "Kiev's provocations have gone too far. The time has come to take decisive measures to ensure our national security and integrity." Speculation is now rampant about what Putin's decisive measures might entail. Could it mean a large-scale attack on Kiev's infrastructure, perhaps even a symbolic strike on its city center? The consequences would be enormous. Ukraine's boldness shows that it is willing to test Russia's limits, but Putin's response could escalate the conflict to unprecedented levels. There is also the question of whether Ukraine's actions are part of a calculated strategy to provoke an overreaction. If so, this is a game with extraordinarily high stakes. At the center of Putin's threats is the Oreshnik missile, described by experts as one of the most advanced in Russia's arsenal, capable of precision strikes that could cripple key targets. Putin's repeated references to the missile underscore his intention to make it a cornerstone of Russia's retaliation strategy. His recent statements leave no doubt about the role this weapon could play in the conflict. During the ceremony, he described it as a weapon of unparalleled power. He declared, "The time for decisive action has come." But what would an attack using this missile mean for the conflict? A direct strike on Kiev city center would not only devastate Ukraine's capital but could also trigger a global crisis. NATO has already warned of severe consequences for any significant escalation. But how far is the West willing to go in response to a Russian attack of this magnitude? Beyond the immediate military impacts, there is also the psychological component. Even the mention of the Oreshnik missile reminds the world of the dangerous capabilities at Putin's disposal and his willingness to use them to protect Russia's sovereignty. As Putin's threats grow louder, the world faces a chilling question: is this the moment when the conflict spirals out of control, or is it a tactic to force concessions from Ukraine and its Western allies? Ukraine, for its part, must now carefully weigh its options. Retaliatory strikes have been a key part of its strategy, but each one risks provoking a response that could alter the course of the war. The attack on Kazan has already prompted Putin to issue his most direct and alarming warnings yet. How far can Kiev go without triggering catastrophic consequences? For Russia, the Kazan attack is seen as a brazen provocation requiring a decisive and symbolic response. Putin's promise of far greater destruction suggests he is ready to escalate the conflict to an unprecedented level. Globally, the stakes could not be higher. A strike on Kyiv city center would send shockwaves through the international community and possibly force NATO into a more active role. The fallout could destabilize not only Ukraine and Russia but the entire region and beyond. As the world watches, the decisions made in the coming weeks will shape the future of this conflict. Are Putin's threats a desperate bluff or the prelude to a devastating escalation? The answers may come sooner than anyone expects. Vladimir Putin's recent ultimatum has drawn the world's attention to the fragile and volatile state of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The drone strike in Kazan, while causing no physical casualties, has shaken the collective psyche of Russia's population. The significance of the attack lies not only in its physical execution but in its symbolism. For the first time in recent history, a strike has reached so deep into Russian territory, far removed from the active war front. This has left many Russians grappling with a new reality: even cities considered safe havens are vulnerable. The Kremlin's reaction was swift and emphatic, with Moscow pointing fingers at Kyiv. Yet, the Ukrainian government has neither confirmed nor denied involvement. The ambiguity around the attack has added to the tension, as it allows for the perception of Ukraine's growing confidence and capacity to strike far from the expected conflict zones. For Putin, the incident has provided both a justification and a platform to escalate his warnings and rhetoric. His statement during the ceremony in Moscow, filled with fiery language, was a stark reminder of Russia's readiness to retaliate. The timing of the Kazan attack is particularly critical. For weeks, Putin has hinted at more aggressive measures, including the potential use of Russia's advanced missile systems, particularly the Oreshnik missile. This weapon, touted for its precision and devastating capability, has become a central element in Putin's narrative of deterrence. It represents more than just a military tool; it symbolizes Russia's determination to enforce its will and protect its sovereignty at any cost. As Putin's warnings grow more explicit, they also reveal a deeper frustration. The resilience of Ukraine, bolstered by Western support, has undermined Russia's expectations of a swift victory. Kyiv's ability to launch daring and effective countermeasures, including operations that strike at the psychological core of Russian security, has forced Putin to adopt a more confrontational posture. His rhetoric has shifted from general warnings to specific threats, signaling a readiness to escalate the conflict in ways the world has not yet seen. The mention of the Oreshnik missile, in particular, underscores this shift. It is not merely a military asset but a psychological weapon designed to instill fear. Putin's repeated references to its capabilities suggest that he views it as a critical element of his strategy to deter further provocations. However, the deployment of such a weapon, especially against civilian or symbolic targets like Kyiv city center, would mark a dramatic escalation with far-reaching consequences. For Ukraine, the stakes have never been higher. Retaliatory strikes have been a cornerstone of its strategy to disrupt Russian operations and send a message of defiance. However, the attack on Kazan represents a departure from previous tactics, targeting an area far removed from the immediate conflict zones. This raises questions about Ukraine's strategy. Is it seeking to provoke an overreaction from Russia to gain international sympathy and support, or is it testing the limits of Russian tolerance? Either way, the risks are enormous. Putin's response to the Kazan attack has already heightened the stakes. His declaration that far greater destruction will follow any further provocations is not just a warning but a line in the sand. If crossed, it could lead to unprecedented military actions. A strike on Kiev's city center, for instance, would not only devastate Ukraine's capital but also force the international community to confront the conflict in ways it has so far avoided. The global implications of such an escalation cannot be overstated. NATO, while issuing warnings about the consequences of further Russian aggression, faces a delicate balancing act. How far is the alliance willing to go in defending Ukraine without triggering a direct confrontation with Russia? The Kazan attack and Putin's subsequent threats have brought these questions to the forefront, with the potential to redefine the West's involvement in the conflict. Beyond the immediate military and geopolitical consequences, there is the psychological dimension. The threat of the Oreshnik missile looms large, serving as a reminder of the destructive capabilities at Russia's disposal. For many, it is not just the possibility of an attack that is alarming but the broader implications of a leader who appears increasingly willing to push boundaries. Putin's fiery rhetoric reflects a leader under pressure, but it also signals a willingness to escalate the conflict to maintain his authority and project strength. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape not only the course of the Russia-Ukraine war but also the broader dynamics of global security. Will Putin follow through on his threats, plunging the region into deeper chaos, or will his rhetoric prove to be a bluff aimed at forcing concessions? For Ukraine, the challenge lies in balancing its need to resist Russian aggression with the risk of provoking a catastrophic response. Meanwhile, the international community watches with a mix of apprehension and uncertainty. The possibility of a strike on Kiev's city center, a symbolic and strategic target, represents a tipping point. Such an action would likely draw a more active response from NATO and could escalate the conflict to levels not seen since the Cold War. The implications for global security are profound, with the potential to destabilize not only the region but also the fragile balance of power that underpins the international order. The attack on Kazan has marked a turning point, not just in the Russia-Ukraine conflict but in the broader narrative of global geopolitics. It has highlighted the risks of escalation, the limits of deterrence, and the unpredictable nature of modern warfare. As the world holds its breath, the question remains, how far is each side willing to go, and what will be the cost of their decisions? In this high-stakes game, the margin for error is razor-thin, and the consequences of miscalculation could be catastrophic.